Right. Get ready, folks, because today we are diving headfirst into this book
Oh, yeah.
that, well, doesn't pull any punches, that's for sure.
Nope.
Liberal Losers. When the right win, we all lose.
Yeah.
And the author, Moses Seenarine,
Yeah.
he really takes a hard look at
He does.
conservative policies.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, this guy, he knows what he's talking about, brings some serious credentials to the table.
Yeah, his family history is like totally wrapped up in labor issues. We're talking like generations who
Right.
lived through like indentured servitude on plantations.
Oh, wow.
So that personal connection, it really comes through.
Yeah.
In his writing, especially when he gets into the core arguments in Chapter 7, labor and workers' rights.
And that's what we're going to be digging into today. And this isn't, just some abstract theoretical debate. This is stuff that's playing out right now in the headlines, the whole
Absolutely.
gig economy explosion, the,
Yep.
minimum wage battle that never seems to end.
Right.
This, the widening racial wealth gap. It's like Seenarine's analysis, it's almost like he had a crystal ball.
It's true.
It's scary how relevant it is.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
To really get where he's coming from, though, I think it helps to like understand the historical context, right? Because we're talking about ideas that have been, simmering for centuries.
Right.
This idea of like,
hands off.
Hands off, yeah, like letting the free market do its thing.
Right, like those classic economic textbooks, the invisible hand.
Exactly.
Guiding everything.
The invisible hand.
But how did we get from like, Adam Smith to, say, modern day conservative policies on like wages or worker training? Like, give me the give me the history in a nutshell here.
Okay, so think of it like this.
Okay.
You have these core principles, right? Minimal government interference.
Okay.
Personal responsibility.
Yep.
The belief that competition ultimately benefits everyone.
Right.
These ideas, they kind of take root in the 18th and 19th centuries, but they really gain traction in the U.S. with figures like Reagan in the 80s.
Okay.
Right? That's when you see a big push for deregulation, cutting taxes, this whole like pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
Right. So that's the foundation. But where does Seenarine, where does he come in? Does he just tear these ideas apart, or is there more to it?
Well, he does more than just, he digs deeper, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't just say, like, these ideas are bad. He dissects the why behind them and then, like, pushes you to think about the consequences intended or not.
Okay.
And Chapter 7 is, like, particularly sharp because it gets at the heart of how these principles translate into policies that affect pretty much everyone who works for a living.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's all of us.
Right.
Almost all of us. So
exactly.
Let's get into it, I guess.
Let's do it.
So, all right, let's unpack some of these like conservative cornerstones, I guess you could call them. Seenarine, he lays out in the book, and I'm thinking back to that phrase you used earlier, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I feel like that kind of ties into this whole personal responsibility thing, right?
100%. Yeah. Chapter 7 really digs into this whole, this idea that like, your economic success is primarily a result of,
your choices.
Yeah, choices.
Your effort. Exactly.
Work hard, make good decisions, and you'll
reap the rewards.
We'll be rewarded, right? It makes sense on paper, but
sounds good.
Yeah.
Seenarine points out that,
it's not always that easy.
It's not always that simple.
Right, because like, not everyone starts on the same, level playing field or whatever. It's not like he's saying, don't work hard, but it's like, of course.
There are other factors at play here.
Totally. Yeah, there are often like these systemic barriers that he points out that, can make it a lot harder for people to get ahead no matter how hard they work.
Yeah. What were some of the examples, like specific examples he used?
He talks about like, growing up in a neighborhood with underfunded schools or like, having really limited job opportunities just based on where you live, and it's like if your only exposure is to like low wage jobs, no benefits, like how far can hard work really get you?
Right.
And so Seenarine's argument is that like focusing just on this personal responsibility piece ignores these like deeper systemic issues that are also at play.
It's like telling someone to just go to a better school when there are no better schools in your area.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like,
it's not a real choice.
It's not a real choice. Exactly.
Right. And that kind of ties into this idea of competitive labor markets, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because, like,
which is another big one.
Yeah, conservatives would argue that, like, competition among employers is a good thing.
Right.
For workers, right? Like the idea being that,
they have to.
Companies will have to offer
compete.
Better wages, better benefits to attract people.
Right.
Because if one company's offering a crap deal,
exactly,
you can go work for their competitor down the street. Like
in theory.
In theory, right.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing seenarine sees some holes in that logic.
Well, yeah, because again, it's like he argues that, like, that assumes this level of worker mobility that doesn't always exist in the real world.
People can't just pick up and move.
Right. People can't just, like,
to a different city.
Pick up and move for a job. They might have family ties. They might have limited resources.
Right.
Maybe the cost of living in those, like, booming job markets is,
sky high.
Astronomical. Exactly. Yeah. So it's like you're kind of stuck.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly.
And that's where I guess he brings in this idea of labor market deregulation.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a big one. So conservatives, they often champion deregulation as a way to, boost the economy, create jobs. Fewer regulations, the thinking goes, means that businesses can thrive. They can hire more people.
Right.
But what seenarine argues is that, like, this approach, it often backfires.
Okay.
Because it can lead to lower wages, worse working conditions.
So fewer rules sounds good on paper.
On paper, yeah, in theory.
But not always in practice.
Not always in practice, exactly.
Right.
And he uses the example of, like, the meatpacking industry, where deregulation led to, like, a surge in workplace injuries.
Oh, wow.
Right, because companies were cutting corners on safety to maximize profit.
Spend more money, right.
Exactly. It's like a really stark reminder that, like, sometimes those regulations, they're there for a reason.
Right. Yeah, to protect workers.
They're there to protect workers, exactly.
From being exploited, basically.
From exploitation, dangerous conditions, exactly.
Okay, so deregulation is about, like...
loosening the reins.
Loosening the reins, but what about, like, the opposite? When the government takes a more active role, like with wages. I know minimum wage debate is something that he tackles head on in this chapter.
Big time. Yeah, and this is where you see those, like, core conservative principles, really on full display.
Okay.
Right? Because conservatives would argue that, like, raising the minimum wage
kills jobs,
hurts small businesses.
Right. I've heard that the free market should decide.
Exactly. The free market should determine wages, not the government.
Not the government, right? And seenarine's take is.
So he pushes back on this idea that raising the minimum wage is this, like, job killer. He points to studies that show, like, minimal impact on employment while significantly improving the lives of low-wage workers who benefit from it.
Right. So it seems like it's one of those classic cases of, like, dueling economic theories versus, like, the actual impact on people's lives.
Versus the real world. Yeah, and that's something you see throughout all of his work. It's like he wants us to look beyond just, like, the talking points and actually, like,
grapple with the nuances.
Grapple with the nuances, exactly.
Speaking of nuances, Chapter 7 also goes into this idea of worker freedom and flexibility, which feels like super relevant to, like, the gig economy.
Yeah. Like,
which is everywhere.
It's Yeah. So what's the, like, conservative perspective on that? So for them, it's all about individual empowerment, right? Okay. This ability to, be your own boss, set your own hours, work from anywhere. Okay. It's the ultimate freedom and flexibility, right?
Good to me.
Right. On the surface, it's like, who wouldn't want that?
Right. Exactly.
More control over your work life.
Live that laptop lifestyle. Yeah. Work from the beach.
Exactly. But, but seenarine, he digs deeper. He asks, like, freedom for whom? At what cost?
Ooh, I like that.
Right. He points out that, like, a lot of gig workers, they're stuck in this precarious position with no benefits, no job security, wages that are often, like, totally unpredictable.
So it's like you're trading security for this, like, almost like idealized version of freedom,
It's like, yeah, exactly. It's like this bait and switch almost.
Yeah. Where it's like, freedom on the front end, but then, precarity on the back end.
Precarity, I like that, yeah.
Right. And this all ties into, like, his critique of conservative tax and wage policies, right? Specifically, this push for tax cuts for businesses, the wealthy.
Right.
While often, like, opposing things like minimum wage increases.
Right, because their argument is, well, if businesses have more money,
Exactly.
They'll create jobs. Everyone will benefit. That whole...
Right. The rising tide lifts all boats.
Rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah, have you heard of that one?
Classic. Yeah, classic line.
But seenarine would say that that's not necessarily.
Well, he argues that this trickle-down economics,
right,
it doesn't always work as advertised.
Right.
In fact, he says it can actually make income inequality worse.
Right. And leave the most vulnerable people even further behind.
So where does education fit into all of this? Because I know he talks about that in Chapter 7 as well.
Yeah, big time. Education and workforce development.
Okay.
So the focus there is typically on, like, vocational training, apprenticeships, STEM education.
Right.
Basically, equipping workers with, you know,
the skills they need.
The skills that are in high demand, exactly.
Right.
Which, you know, makes sense on the surface, right?
Right.
Give people the tools they need to succeed.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Well, so seenarine, he agrees that, you know, skills training is important, but he argues that it's not a cure-all, right?
Right.
Like, it doesn't address, for example, the deeper structural issues like racial and gender disparities in certain industries. Or the fact that, like, you know, technology is automating away jobs, even skilled jobs.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, it's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole picture.
It's not the whole picture.
Exactly.
So we've talked about these, like, conservative cornerstones, you know, personal responsibility, competitive markets, deregulation.
Right.
But, like, how does this stuff actually play out in the real world? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, what I appreciate about seenarine is he uses, like, real stories.
Yeah.
Real examples to kind of bring these ideas to life.
He does. He does. And one of the, I think, most compelling examples he uses in Chapter 7 is the decline of manufacturing jobs in America. Because, like, for decades, right, these were the jobs that built the middle class.
Right. The good old days.
Right. Good pay, benefits, a sense of security. Like, they were a pathway to a better life.
Yeah. It wasn't just a job. It was like a career.
Exactly.
It was
a way of life.
A way of life.
Right. Exactly.
But then globalization happened, automation, factories closed down, jobs shipped overseas. And it's like, how do you reconcile that, right, with this idea of, like, pure personal responsibility?
It's not like these people just woke up one day and were like,
exactly,
I don't want to work hard anymore.
Right, exactly. These were hardworking people who, like, you know, played by the rules.
Right.
What were they supposed to do? Just
will those jobs back into existence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it ignores these larger economic forces that are at play.
Exactly. And it's kind of a thread I'm seeing here, like, totally. With a lot of these arguments, it's like, you can't just, like...
It's like you take this very narrow view.
Right.
And you ignore all these other factors.
The bigger picture.
The bigger picture, exactly.
And it's, I don't know, it's just, it's a pattern. It's like...
It's a pattern.
You see it over and over again.
And he points it out.
And then this kind of ties into another example, the gig economy.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Which, you know, again, is on the one hand held up as, like,
shining example.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing.
Of freedom and flexibility.
Yeah.
Be your own boss. Set your own hours. Work from anywhere.
Work in your pajamas. I get it.
Right, exactly. Laptop lifestyle.
But, yeah, seenarine, he digs deeper.
He digs deeper and he asks, like, freedom for whom? At what cost?
Right.
Right, because he points out that, like, a lot of gig workers, they're stuck.
In this, like, really precarious position.
That's tough.
No benefits, no job security, and wages that are often, like, completely unpredictable.
It's like you're trading, you said before, security.
Yeah.
For this kind of, like, illusion of freedom.
Illusion, yeah.
And that kind of brings us to, like, the minimum wage thing again.
Yes, exactly. Which is, you know, huge.
Because that's another example where it's like,
exactly.
You know, the conservative argument is don't raise the minimum wage, it'll kill jobs, it'll hurt businesses. But then seenarine throws in, like, I don't know, this curveball.
He does.
He brings up Seattle.
Seattle, yeah. Which is, like, so interesting because
they went
all in, $15 an hour, and everyone was like, the sky is falling.
Right.
Businesses are going to shut down. There are going to be massive job losses.
Mass exodus.
Right.
Everyone's going to move.
Right.
Businesses are going to leave.
It's going to be a disaster. But what happened?
Yeah, what did happen?
Right. Studies show employment remained relatively stable.
Okay.
While, of course, you know, low-wage workers.
Right, you got a raise.
Got a raise, exactly.
So it's like sometimes the data just doesn't
line up
with what we think is going to happen.
Really, the ideology.
The ideology, yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And this all kind of circles back to this, like,
this is a big one.
This huge issue, the racial employment gap.
Yeah.
That he talks about.
Because it's like, you can talk about free markets all you want. you can talk about personal responsibility, but like the reality is the playing field's not level for everyone.
No, it's not.
It's just not.
And we know that.
And we know that, and he cites data that shows that, like, you know, even when you account for education experience, like these disparities, they persist.
They do.
Which suggests that, like, you know,
deeper issues.
There's something else going on.
It's not just about working hard.
Exactly.
So, like, how do we fix that then? Because if those barriers are so, like...
Right. This is the deeply entrenched.
This is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Right? And it's something that, you know, seenarine doesn't pretend to have all the answers to.
Of course not.
But he does leave us with something, I think, important to think about.
Which is that, you know, as technology continues to reshape, like, you know, the world of work.
Right.
What role should the government play in making sure that, like, you know, everyone has an opportunity to thrive, you know, not just...
Right, not just the people who are already in a good spot.
Exactly.
Yeah, it feels like we're at a crossroads. Like, the old playbook isn't...
It's not working
anymore.
Yeah, and that's what I think makes his work so, like, compelling and so important right now. Yeah. Because he's not just critiquing the old, but he's, like, pushing us to imagine something better.
Right. Like, what could it look like if we actually tried to create something more just...
More fair, more equitable.
More equitable. Yeah. Exactly. Well, on that note, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
Into Moses Seenarine's book.
Liberal Losers.
Liberal Losers. Yeah. When the right win, we all lose. Make sure to check out his book and let us know what you think.
Yeah. Would love to hear your thoughts.
We're out.